Hi, everybody. So, as you know, I have a book that's going to be released on December 15th. It's called Whose Life Is It? The Moral Debt for Life Enslavement. I was just on a panel yesterday and I got a lot of pushback for using the word slavery. And so I'm going to um, basically discuss why I'm using the term slavery because I think it is accurate. It is descriptive of the human predicament. All right. So, a lot of people think that the fact that I'm using the term life slavery, that it trivializes in their minds real slavery. And by real slavery, they're talking about chattel slavery, right? Because we're not legally owned, at least not in a sense that is tangible, that there's not an actual auction, right? We're not actually in shackles. To them, that means that this slavery is not real. It actually is real, and I'm going to tell you why it's real. And this is not my personal definition. The book actually is based on a definition of slavery given by the U.S. Supreme Court in Plessy versus Ferguson. The Supreme Court defines slavery as follows: slavery implies involuntary servitude, a state of bondage, the ownership of mankind as chattel, or at least the control of the labor and services of one man for the benefit of another, and the absence of a legal right to the disposal of his own person, property, and services. Right. I want you to know that the Supreme Court's definition of slavery is authoritative. It's not my personal definition. So, by the second definition, right, there's types of slavery. The first one is chattel slavery, and then the second is the control of the labor and services of a man for the benefit of another, and the absence of a legal right to dispose of his own person, property, and services. So, let's focus on the first part, that your labor and services are for the benefit of another. Now, if you didn't choose to exist voluntarily, life was imposed on you, and you're forced to remain here because you don't have the legal right to opt out, then your labor and services are for the benefit of others. It's for the benefit of society, for the benefit of the state, it's for the benefit of your parents. Nothing about your existence benefits you. That is abject slavery. And then I discussed at length the deprivation of disposal rights of your person, property, and services, right? So, um, nothing in this definition given by the U.S. Supreme Court requires that a person be bought and sold. Nothing about it requires that it's based on racial subordination. It doesn't require chains. It doesn't require plantations, right? The absence of disposal rights over your person, property, and services is determinative. So, do you have disposal rights? Let's apply this test systematically. Can you legally dispose of your life with medical assistance? No. You can't even legal. I'm not. I guess I don't even get to medical assistance because you can't. You legally don't have a right to dispose of your life, no matter what. Even without medical assistance, you don't have that right. And the book actually discusses the difference between rights and ability. Just because you have the ability to do it doesn't make it a right. I think a lot of people are confused about what rights mean because it's the way the term rights has been hijacked to mean something that it didn't originally mean. The purpose of rights is to limit the sovereign's power. The sovereign was at the time that the term rights was conceptualized. It was thought that the sovereign had unlimited power because the sovereign was the hand of God. The sovereign was acting on behalf of God. And so the purpose of rights is to limit the sovereign's authority, that there are things that are so fundamental that even the sovereign can't violate them. So you don't have a right to health care, not as a natural right. You don't have a right to housing, right? Under this framework that I'm putting together, you do have a right, not as a natural right, but as a consequence of the state's paternalistic authority. So I am making a case for socialism, but not as a natural right, but because the state has completely taken control of our lives. The state controls nearly every aspect of our existence that I think that the state has a corresponding duty. I don't think that the state can play such a paternalistic role and control every function of your existence and then abdicate it when it comes to provision. So, no, if the state is going to control us like slaves, then the state needs to provide for us like slaves. Um, the expression is duties without rights make slavery, rights without duties make anarchy. So the states has the sovereign has all of this authority, but no corresponding responsibility. They don't have to provide for you. They don't have to provide SNAP benefits. They don't even have to protect you. Yet you have a duty to obey. So that's not going to work under this framework. And so the whole purpose of this framework is to delegitimize it. It's not that I have the power to unilaterally dismantle it, but I am going to systematically delegitimize this entire system. I'm delegitimizing tyranny of the majority, democracy itself, the system of life slavery, the sanctity of life mythology, all of it. So you do not have the right to dispose of your person, because if you do try to dispose of your person, they're going to send men with guns to stop you from doing it. They're going to institutionalize. They're going to pump you full of drugs. The person who assists you is going to be criminalized. So you don't have the right. You can say that you have the ability. That is not the same as having a right. Do you have the right to dispose of your property? No, not without interference from your state. You don't actually own property outright. You don't own your home outright. You still have to pay taxes. Otherwise, the state can actually take it from you, right? The state can actually destroy your property and then claim sovereign immunity. So you don't have the state has superior disposal rights of your property than you do. They can seize your assets, right, without charging you with a crime, civil asset forfeiture. They can impose fines and traffic citations. And so it's a comprehensive systemic enslavement. So you don't have superior disposal rights of your own property. You just don't. The state has superior disposal rights. So the state is your master. You do not have superior disposal rights of your own labor, right? You can't work without an occupational license. And some people, there was somebody on the discussion that I had yesterday saying that you take student loans voluntarily, so therefore it's your responsibility. No, it's not. Nothing about this is voluntary. People take out student loans because the state has imposed occupational license requirements, right? They have imposed these barriers to entry. And so unless you comply with their occupational license requirements, then you don't have a right to work. And if you don't, or you don't have the ability to work. If you don't have the ability to work, then you starve. So under this comprehensive life enslavement system, you have to get an education in order to survive within this systemic enslavement that they have concocted. So it's not, this is what I'm trying to say. They always want to talk about personal responsibility, pull yourself up by your bootstraps, right? There is no collective responsibility, even though you guys support this. There is no free market. There is no free will. The state has the final say on all things. And so if you support democracy, if you support tyranny of the majority, then you bear a moral responsibility, a moral debt, along with the original life enslavers, which I also articulate in this book, that the public are not innocent. They're not innocent bystanders. They are actively participating in a system of life slavery. And they benefit from life slavery, right? You can be forced to serve on a jury without just compensation, right? That is extracting labor. That is involuntary labor. You can be conscripted to serve in the military, right? There's all these duties that are imposed on you for living in a democratic society, even though you never chose to live in a democratic society. You lack the right to an autonomous disposal of your services. So Under the Supreme Court's test of Plessy versus Ferguson, you lack disposal rights of your person, your property, and your services, at least autonomous. You don't have autonomous disposal rights. You don't. The state has superior disposal rights. So, by definition, the Supreme Court says the absence of a legal right to the disposal of its own property and services constitutes slavery. Again, this is not my definition, this is their definition. Their definition is authoritative. But it's not real slavery, right? So that's what people are going to say. You can't compare chattel slavery to whatever I'm calling this life slavery, right? That trivializes their suffering. So why isn't there this same pushback when people talk about wage slavery? Because everyone knows what wage slavery is, right? They instead of being owned by a master, you're basically rented to your master. Your master gets to rent you, and you don't have a choice under capitalism because whoever owns capital controls the means of production, which is under what Proudhon said is that property is theft because property cannot be owned by individuals, those who, at least not in perpetuity. Those who make productive use of capital are the rightful owners, but under statism allows the capitalists to exploit the labor of others and they get to live without working. So everyone wants to talk about how it's personal responsibility, yet it's in a total conspiracy to enslave everybody. And then nobody wants to take any responsibility for the abolition of slavery, right? They don't want to actually do the dirty work of liberating people. They just want to talk about personal responsibility and pulling yourself up by your bootstraps, while at the same time they're tying your hands behind your back so you can't actually pull yourself up, right? Because all of these mechanisms prevent you from having autonomy over how you want what you want to do with your life. And so they support this entire system, this entire racket is with the support of the majority, yet they absolve themselves of any responsibility for your enslavement. How dare you compare wage slavery to chattel slavery, right? Because slavery is not a concrete term, it's a category of relationship defined by domination and extraction. There are several different forms of slavery throughout history. Chattel slavery, where people were bought and sold as property. Indentured servitude, enslaved until a debt is repaid. Serfdom, people were bound to land controlled by lords. Wage slavery, people must work or starve, right? Prison enslavement, forced labor for inmates. Sex trafficking is modern slavery, right? It's completely involuntary. Child labor, it's forced work, no autonomy, life slavery. It's a forced existence and a prohibition on the right to make a graceful exit. So all of these forms of slavery share the same common denominators, right? A lack of autonomy, forced participation, and extraction of value. The 13th Amendment recognizes multiple forms of slavery. The 13th Amendment says neither slavery nor involuntary servitude except as punishment for crimes. So there's two distinct forms of slavery. Slavery, which is the broader category, and then involuntary servitude, which is forced labor. So the 13th Amendment is not limited to chattel slavery. It says slavery. This is the entire category. Right? So if the Constitution prohibits all slavery, then my book satisfies the legal definition of slavery. So why is wage slavery accepted, but life slavery is offensive? Because wage slavery is politically safe. It critiques capitalism, a system many people already question. It doesn't threaten fundamental assumptions about the legitimacy of forced existence, parents' right to procreate, the state's authority over your body and your life. It doesn't critique democracy itself, but life slavery threatens everything. It says your parents enslaved you by forcing you into existence. The state maintains your enslavement. Democracy is tyranny when you can't opt out. Courts are complicit. The entire system is illegitimate. People resist life slavery because, not because it's inaccurate, but because accepting it requires confronting uncomfortable truths. But discomfort does not make something false. Life slavery is actually worse than wage slavery, right? Um, Under wage slavery, human beings are forced to work in order to survive. The surplus value is extracted by the capitalists. Capitalism, the capitalists don't. Capitalism can't exist without labor, right? Because they don't make productive use of capital. It's the workers that make the capital valuable, but the capitalist gets to live without working. So they're extracting benefits from other people's labor without actually producing anything. And this entire capitalistic system is backed by violence. It's backed by state enforced property rights. Property rights are enforced through violence because if you violate someone's so-called property, then the state will use violence to enforce those property rights. Even though those property rights don't exist in nature, they're complete legal fiction, right? Life slavery. This is a parallel to wage slavery, right? None of us consented to existing, right? All of the economic exploitation. So life in slavery includes all of the economic exploitation of wage slavery, plus extraction from our parents, and our parents extracted meaning, purpose, emotional satisfaction, a legacy. They get to self-actualize, right? Plus, the state is extracting taxes, forced participation, and political legitimacy, right? Under life slavery, you can't escape it, even if you solve the economic problem. So life slavery is more comprehensive than wage slavery. The state owns your body, which I articulated in chapter 1. The state actually owns your body, not you. That you're owned by the collective. They say that life is inalienable, so nobody owns you. What that really means is that everybody owns you, and you have no legal remedy because the state has not recognized a property interest in your own personhood. Yet they recognize corporate personhood. Imagine that. So the total extraction is 5.4 million plus immeasurable psychological suffering. If wage slavery accurately describes capitalist exploitation, then life slavery accurately describes the more fundamental enslavement that makes wage slavery possible. You can't have wages without first having life slaves who were forced into existence and prohibited from leaving. The property law logic. Premise number 1. Ownership requires disposal rights. If you can't dispose of something, you don't fully own it. Premise 2. The party with final authority over disposal is the actual owner. Premise 3. You cannot legally dispose of your life. The state has final authority. Conclusion. The state owns your life, not you. This is first year law school property analysis, right? If someone has superior disposal rights over something, they have superior ownership rights. That's how property works. Now, what do we call it when a person owns another person or an entity owns another person? We call it slavery. But wait, the state doesn't own you like property, someone would say. Collective ownership is still ownership, right? If you don't own your life and no individual owns it, but the state controls whether you may dispose of it, the state owns it on behalf of the collective. The public/state slavery, the public/state maintains the slavery for the benefit of the collective, right? So what I say in my book is, if no one owns your life, then life exists in a public domain. The collective owns it through its agent, the state. This is socialism applied to the most fundamental property, the self. So this is what I'm saying. This is an inversion of socialism. There is not a collective ownership of property, right? But there is a collective ownership of human beings, which makes it so perverse. Um, and so as a result, then I'm calling for economic socialism, that there should be remuneration for those who exist involuntarily. Um, the state acts as a trustee for the public's property interest in you. There is no right to self-ownership. The public owns you. There's a public interest in maintaining your enslavement. Life slavery is actually worse because private slavery had an owner you could identify and hold accountable. But public slavery diffuses responsibility, right? Society decides. They hide behind democracy because the majority voted for it. They get to make claims of moral legitimacy because it's for the public good. And it's harder to resist because there's a phantom entity. And so you don't know who to fight. It's just the public. It's just collective. Who is the actual person that is enslaving you? Right? So state slavery is more insidious than private slavery because it's packaged as freedom while maintaining total control. Now, why would I use such a loaded term as slavery? Because precision matters, right? Consider the alternatives. I could call it restrictions on autonomy, right? That sounds technical, it's bureaucratic. It implies a minor inconvenience, right? It's easy to dismiss. It suggests negotiation and compromise, right? I could call it a limit on self-determination. This is academic language. It feels abstract. It doesn't communicate urgency, right? It invites debate about reasonable limits, right? And the whole purpose of this book is to take it out of the academic discourse and put it into a pragmatic discourse that these are tangible. This is actionable. This is a system that should be resisted. I don't care about the academic portion of it because the academics are not going to be the ones to liberate anybody. Involuntary existence, right? I could call it an involuntary existence, which it actually is. It doesn't convey the power dynamic. There's no historical resonance. It generates an intellectual discussion, not action. But slavery is more accurate. It's morally unambiguous, right? Everyone agrees that slavery is wrong. It's legally precise based on the Supreme Court's definition. It historically resonant, right? We know what abolition requires. It forces engagement because it can't be ignored or dismissed. It demands action. Slavery must be abolished, not reformed. The word slavery works in a way that other words cannot. When you say we need to reform restrictions on autonomy, people nod and move on. When you say we need to abolish slavery, people have to choose. Either this is slavery and it must be abolished, or it isn't slavery and here's why. There is no middle ground, and that is the point. That is the reason why I'm using the word slavery. Every liberation movement has required naming the oppression accurately, right? Women's suffrage. They call it women's suffrage. It wasn't women have limited political participation. They called it what it was. Women were disenfranchised, right? Civil rights. It wasn't African Americans face social disadvantages. No, they said this is apartheid. This is segregation. This is oppression. The labor movement. They didn't say workers receive suboptimal compensation. They said this is wage slavery. This is exploitation. LGBTQ rights. They didn't say alternative lifestyles face social disapproval. No, what they said is this is discriminatory. This is persecution. So accurately naming the liberation is required for liberation, right? You can't abolish what you will not name. You can't build a movement around a euphemism, right? The abolitionist movement didn't say, let's reform the labor conditions of enslaved persons. They said, this is slavery. Slavery must be abolished. So life slavery must do the same thing. The life abolition movement has a similar framework. First, name the oppression. This is slavery. Prove the system is illegitimate, right? Demand total abolition. Organize resistance. Make slavery too costly to maintain. Build alternative institutions, right? This only works if you call it slavery. You can't be an abolitionist of a suboptimal autonomy arrangement. You have to abolish slavery. Enslavers never freed their slaves because philosophers make careful arguments, right? They freed their slaves because organized resistance made slavery more expensive than freedom. The same will be true here. Those who benefit from your forced existence will not grant you freedom because we ask politely. They will grant it when maintaining life slavery costs more than ending it. But first, we must call it what it is. Now, there are some who will say that this is coming from a privileged position, right? That you're just complaining about nothing. Um, they'll say that child slavery was worse than life slavery in severity and brutality. Um, but saying that chattel slavery is worse doesn't negate that life slavery still meets the legal indicia of slavery, right? It's still slavery. Maybe it's less brutal than chattel slavery, but it is still slavery. Life slavery is slavery, and it is the foundation that makes all other forms of slavery possible. They'll say you choose to keep living, so that means that you consent to your enslavement. No, you did not. Nothing about this is voluntary. You didn't choose to exist. You didn't choose to continue to exist. Everything about this is by force, through violence. Procreation is an act of violence, and it's maintained through violence because if you try to escape, they will violently force you to continue being a slave. Now, there's some who will say that the state is protecting you, that your enslavement is for your own good, right? Paternalism is not protection when it denies autonomy. If you lock me in a basement for my own good, I'm still in prison, right? If the state denies you the right to a graceful exit, it is still denying your autonomy. And the state claims to protect your life, but then it taxes you for maintaining a life that you don't even want, that is involuntary. It forces you to work to afford the life that you don't want. It denies you adequate support for your involuntary existence. It refuses legal remedies when that life becomes unbearable. So the goal of my book is not to convince everyone. The goal is to build a movement for those who will recognize this truth. Abolitionists did not convince all slave owners, right? They built resistance until slavery became too costly. We're not asking enslavers to free us voluntarily. We're organizing to make maintaining our enslavement too expensive to continue. The word slavery is necessary for this organizing. What this means in practice, by the Supreme Court's definition, we are all enslaved. The term slavery is legally accurate and strategically necessary. Life slavery follows logically from wage slavery. Collective ownership through the state is still ownership. The word slavery is essential for building an abolitionist movement. So what follows? Right here are the demands from our parents who enslaved us through procreation. We demand forced heirships, a minimum of 50% of the estate for those who are married. And if they're not married, then we're entitled to 100% of the estate. respect for autonomy, including the right to opt out. Those who procreate, the life enslavers, right? The life enslavers forfeit their own right to opt out until these debts are paid. From the state that maintains our enslavement, we demand either the unconditional right to medical assistance or for full socialism, right? Complete material support for your involuntary existence. And if you refuse both options, then you just have to admit that your entire system is slavery and is illegitimate. So the term life slavery is accurate. We are enslaved. It's not a metaphor. It's not hyperbole. By the Supreme Court's own definition, what this system is maintaining is a system of life slavery. You lack disposal rights over your person, property, and services. The definition is satisfied, right? I'm sorry that you're offended by me calling it slavery. It is what it is. The facts don't care about your feelings. Either debate whether my use of the word slavery is legally accurate, or you're just going to have to concede that what I'm saying is right. But the fact that you're offended by the fact I'm calling it slavery is of no moment. Slavery must be abolished. We demand our disposal rights. Enslavers owe compensation. Tyranny over captives is illegitimate. You can call it democracy all you want. I did not consent to participate in democracy. The majority has no moral claim over my life. The society does not own me. So this is not to trivialize chattel slavery. I am a descendant of chattel slaves. That's not even the point. This falls under the umbrella term of slavery. It's not the same as chattel slavery, but it is slavery nevertheless. So unless you can actually negate my arguments, and that, first of all, you're gonna have to read the book, right? Because I'm not going to articulate everything in these live streams. You're going to have to read the book, because my book paints a complete story of your enslavement. Maybe you are a happy slave. Maybe this doesn't offend you. Maybe you can actually get through life and not care about the fact that you're enslaved. It doesn't negate the fact that you're enslaved, right? You don't have disposal rights. Your disposal rights are maintained by the state. So regardless, if you feel, no matter how you feel, you can think that you can live in an open air prison all you want, but at the same time, maybe you don't have a desire to exercise disposal rights, but it doesn't negate the fact that you don't have them in the first place. So you don't realize that you're a slave until you have a desire to exercise rights that you don't actually have. So that is the test. Try to exercise those rights and see how the state will use violence to prevent you from exercising those rights.